Dr. Tracey Holloway, let's talk about air quality. And I think maybe a lot of people, especially when they're watching about this on the news, get a little confused as to what it means. So, can you tell me first how air quality is measured?
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. When we're thinking about air quality, we're really talking about chemicals in the air that can make people sick, can impact visibility, can reduce crop yields. There are a lot of different chemicals and different impacts. But the two main chemicals that probably pop up when people check their smartphones to see what the air is a gas called ozone and particles in the air called fine particulate matter, or sometimes PM 2.5, which stands for particulate matter smaller than 2.5 microns. And so, that's really what we're usually talking about when we think about air quality problems. It's usually either an ozone problem or a PM 2.5 problem.
So, if we're looking at our phone and we see high levels of those things, where are they coming from?
Yeah, so they both come from human caused sources and natural sources. And the biggest natural source is wildfires. And so we can see the particles with our eyes, usually that's what the smoke looks like. Ozone is usually coming right along with it, but it's an invisible gas. And so how the fire is affecting a particular location may be mainly on the particles, maybe on the ozone, maybe both. And in both cases, they're combining with a lot of local human sources, cars and trucks, industries, power plants, and even other sources like trees and plants emit some chemicals that contribute, windblown dust. It hits across a lot of different issues, but it relies on sort of what's in the air that we're breathing in.
So, I think we've heard that wildfires are getting worse in a changing climate. So that's kind of scary because then it means the air that we're breathing is getting worse too. What does this do to our health on a daily basis?
Right. So, I think different groups are sensitive to air pollution, some more than others. Children, the elderly, and people with pre existing conditions are the most vulnerable to health impacts from smoke. And actually, you may notice if you check your phone with the air quality index, they actually categorize green as good, yellow as moderate, orange is unhealthy for sensitive groups. And that's who we're talking about, the children, elderly, pre existing conditions. The health impacts, the biggest health impact is respiratory disease. You're breathing it into your lungs, and so sickness is related to your lungs, and that might be asthma or asthma attacks. It may obviously be worsening COPD. There's a lot of different respiratory disease that it's associated with. But the truth is, if you think of almost any negative outcome and what air pollution exposure does, it makes it worse. So our life expectancy goes down, heart disease goes up, birth outcomes can get worse. So respiratory disease is sort of the front and center, and I think that's what people think of. They might even, cough when they are outdoors on a smoky day. But that's just part of the health story when it comes to air pollution.
Okay, so we're a weather show. How does weather impact air quality?
Well, really, air quality and weather go hand in hand. And on hot days, those are the days that are most likely to be high ozone days. And on days when you have low winds, those are days that are likely to be high for both ozone and particulate matter because it's getting trapped and kind of sometimes building up to those unhealthy levels. Also, when you have wind patterns that are coming from a source. So if the winds are blowing from an area that has a wildfire, then it's going to be carrying that smoke into the area. In some senses, there's weather connections in other ways, like, humidity levels can play a role in the chemistry. But I would say that the wind patterns and the heat when it comes to ozone are the two biggest issues.
Yeah, and in the past few years, man, we've seen wildfire smoke really travel. I live in the South. We got it last year from the Canadian wildfires, which I don't think I'd ever experienced that in South Carolina before. But then also, didn't smoke travel from Australia to the United States at one point too?
Yeah, the smoke and chemicals in the air can travel a really long way. It takes about 5 days for air to make it from Asia to California, and about another 5 days to go from the West Coast to the East Coast. So, if the chemicals are staying in the air, then they'll just flow right along with the weather patterns that carry them from place to place. I think it's a really interesting issue because, of course, we can't control what air is coming in from outside of our state or what's coming in from outside of our country. And the patterns kind of flow on a day-to-day basis. They change, but there's some global patterns where the United States is and what we consider the mid latitudes. The winds are predominantly coming from Asia. And from the west, whereas actually in the tropics, the winds are coming from the east. And so sometimes you have Florida experiencing dust storms from the African continent that are being carried across the Atlantic Ocean. So it depends where you are in the US, which direction you might get affected from.
It makes me think of like your neighbor's tree is leaning on your fence. So like whose responsibility is it? I guess we all
Right.
just have to take care of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the United States specifically. Are there parts of the US that generally tend to have worse air quality and parts of the United States that tend to have really good air quality? Let's say you do have asthma and you're like, I'm going to move to somewhere where I'm going to be feeling a little bit better. Are there like some good spots?
Yeah. So, I think first of all, when we think about the air quality story in the US, with the exception of wildfires, it's actually a good news story. We have the Clean Air Act that was passed in 1970. And because of that, our air has been getting cleaner and cleaner for almost every chemical in almost every place. Um, that said, there's some places that have worse air pollution, mainly places that have a lot of cars and trucks or a lot of industry. And sometimes the weather patterns like hot days or lower wind conditions that allow those pollutants to build up. So actually, the EPA runs thousands of monitors across the United States that provide publicly available data every hour, every day. So there's a lot of resources that people can tap into to find out the air quality. And also, areas that have too many days that are considered in that unhealthy zone, those then are flagged as what is called non-attainment, which means that they're not meeting the health standards of the EPA. So another way someone could see how one area varies from another is to say, is it passing or failing those guidelines from the EPA? And maybe just as one more example, the American Lung Association actually issues grades for every county in the United States every year in what they call the State of the Air Report. And that they sort of use the same data that the EPA use, where it's from these ground-based monitors. But the idea is that even if air is passing the standards, it may not be passing with an A. And so this idea of is it A or B or C or D or F, that's information that the American Lung Association puts out every year.
Gotcha. Great. Dr. Holloway, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add about air quality?
No, thank you, Emily. It was really a pleasure to talk today.